Disruptors and curious minds, we are at it again. Welcome to another episode of Thinking on Paper. We have some exciting stuff to talk about today. And I don't know, I'm excited to dig in about learning. Learning's a big part of what I like to do. And, I love to learn, I love to teach. And just the idea of how we prepare the next generation for jobs and roles and things that haven't even necessarily been created yet is just a fascinating jazz effort, if you will. Mark Fielding with me as always. How are you doing, sir? What's happening on the other side over there?
I'm doing great, thank you. As yourself, very interested to see where we go with this. Already we're into the job market in the future, and I think that one thing that is particularly daunting for children today is not only how different the job market will be, but how different the job market will be every 5 years. They'll have to pivot it might be less than that. You might learn a skill, get a job, do something great, and then have to pivot because it's been automated or removed or simplified by tech. So I think that's quite scary, but also maybe exciting if you're the right person. I used to be a teacher, so I'm very interested in the educational side of it. I came into emerging tech through the lens of my daughter, like what will the internet be like for her in the future? So our guest today teaches 10-year-olds about the blockchain. I'm very excited about it.
What did you teach, Mark, when you were teaching?
I was an English teacher, an English language, not even English lit, but that's what I did in Paris.
Wow.
It was the best way to learn grammar. Actually, like forget Grammarly and these other apps. Just be an English teacher for a few years, and you'll understand the workings of grammar. It really helps in your writing.
I can imagine. Grammar is like math, the math of writing, which I kind of struggle with a little bit. The creative side, not so much. Well, awesome. Well, I would certainly take a class from you, Mark.
No,
on some of that stuff.
no.
So speaking of the future, right? Speaking of the job market and that sort of thing, I definitely want to give a nod to our great sponsor, Ripple with a W. The folks over there are amazing. So their marketing's on-demand talent platforms. You need to flex out and you need to bring in some marketing superpowers. They actually have a lot of technology-based strategy type superpowers related to Web3 and blockchain and that sort of thing as well. But, if you're a business, we're at the tip of Q4. We're getting into Q4, right? There's probably some budgets out there that, were left unused maybe, or maybe some new priorities, some new initiatives. Give Ripple a try, let them flex out and support your team, augment the team. If you're looking for folks, you can contact them at clientteam@ripple.com and the website, WRIPPLE.com. Thanks to Ray and Dixie and the team. Without further ado, let's dig into it. I'm stoked, man. Why don't you introduce our guest here, Mark?
Yeah. So our guest today is Kevin Riedl. A lot of Web3 LinkedIn especially are familiar with him. He's a blockchain engineer. He's a dApp developer. He's the founder of Waveact, like a Web3 software company. He writes the No BS Around Tech newsletter. He's a podcast host. And of particular interest today with his company, Waveact, he runs workshops for kids from 10 about software development, about blockchain, writing smart contracts, and a lot more, which we're going to unpack. And he's also a former firefighter, father, and a handstand fanatic. I'm not sure we'll have time to get into the calisthenics, but
I got to learn about the handstand stuff first. Let's bring him on.
Let's bring him on.
What's happening, Kevin? Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, wow, that's an intro, and I guess I have to brace myself with English today. An English teacher and an US American, so that's going to be challenging for me today. But yeah, thanks for the invite, guys.
Since we're you bring that up, you're multilingual. That must really help in the tech space. It must give you an advantage because there aren't that many multilinguists. Is it a help or is it a hindrance? How does the language affect your day-to-day work?
That's a great question already. If you're an actual developer, right, it's for sure very important to be able to communicate effectively. But let's say it's not a necessity on all instances, I would say, especially if you are in a all remote international organization. You oftentimes have different time zones, which results in a lot of async work, and written communication is for sure oftentimes much easier, and things can be translated more seamless in a more seamless way than if you actually actively work in an office or in a smaller company and these kind of things. As an engineer, for sure, English is super important, but not sure if a second language is an actual advantage here, right? Except you want to work for example, an Austrian or German corporation.
What about on GitHub when you want to go read the documentation? Is that all in English? Or do you have translations, or are you so comfortable with the language of blockchain that it doesn't matter? Or is that, I don't know if that's the right question. I mean, do German engineers or Japanese engineers have a different way to code in Solidity, or is it all the same?
Well, in general, there's this, not sure if it's an unwritten rule, but everyone in general codes in English. For sure, you sometimes find, especially when you look towards Asia, you find, or even Spanish speaking countries, you find code and documentation written in those languages. But in general, I think everyone always tries to keep it in English, because that makes it for sure easier to use open source software as a software that you're allowed to use for your own project, as a consequence, right? Because you don't need to then actively learn a second language in that regard.
Okay. Since we jumped, that wasn't the first question I wanted to ask, but it was an interesting question. I wanted to talk about like your journey first into developing. How did you get into it? Did you always have a tech background? Did you start in HTML and JavaScript before you moved across? How did you make the move if that's the case? And what's maybe the biggest challenge you found in dApp development using these blockchain coding, and what's the biggest success perhaps you've had?
A lot of interesting and great questions. Let me start from the start without overextending. Let's say I started developing simple websites like most people did at the age of 12, 13. And at that time, I basically had one huge website, and I just, as a young guy, I tried to get everything on there, right? From mobile apps to everything I could imagine. It didn't make sense, right? But interestingly, at that time, I had around, I think, 500 unique visitors per day, which
Wow.
is, for a 13, 14-year-old, I was quite proud of that. And based from that, I basically got myself started. But the fun thing, a little fun fact in that regard, was when I started out developing those websites, I didn't know what HTML, CSS, and these kind of things were. I just used a CMS like WordPress or some other tool that non-developers can use to create websites. And one day I discovered a button that actually transformed the text I've written on the website into HTML. And I just thought, what the heck is this? I just removed it and was wondering why my website was gone, right? These kind of things. So that was, I would say, the first touch point of myself discovering what actually software development is. And from there on, I started developing or optimizing my day-to-day. I basically just did process optimization for myself. Developed a lot of, let's say, niche programs that made my own life easier, from just, programs that helped me manage my homeworks to countdowns when the class is finally over, these kind of things. And from there on, I then even started developing or looking into security. Basically, I was everything in legal, in the legal area. So nothing to worry about here, but I started developing malware and searching for security issues in companies, in schools, and these kind of things. And that was just something I was really passionate about.
Okay.
But it was
So
more about
that's more white hat kind of stuff is what they call that, right? Like
well,
Oh,
I would have been a white hat, right, if I would have gotten or had a contract, right?
got it.
In some instances, I just had, for example, a permission of the school within a project to distribute malware, these kind of things. But to be honest, I don't think they knew what they're actually approving here, right? Let's put it that way. No harm was caused, nothing like that. But for sure, there was some, uncertainty in the school, at the school. And yeah, from there on, I basically got really fascinated about a lot of security stuff, and that got me then to IoT, smart city applications, and from there on then to blockchain, these kind of things.
To me, this is super interesting, and
Yeah.
it rings true with the path that I didn't discover until I was a little bit, well, until I was like 30, early 30s or whatever, that where if you're driven by your curiosity, you have an insatiable amount of energy and drive to do what you want to do. And I love the fact, because I've done my own websites on WordPress and all of that stuff, and I've looked at the code. I just, my eyes got crossed and I jumped out of it. But
you look at the code and then you look away. It's like, what?
Yeah, but for that to be your catalyst for getting into this stuff by going, oh, here are the building blocks. Like, this would be really cool to learn this thing. I mean, a lot of people kind of train as a coder or developer prior to and then start building stuff. And I think that's such a cool way. And it's probably fed your curiosity continuously, I would imagine.
Absolutely. For better and worse, to be honest, because I had a time where I basically just tried to learn everything, right? I guess like many people do. I looked into quantum computing. To be honest, no idea, no expertise in that at all, but I just tried to develop some niche programs. I tried some so-called esoteric programming languages, basically, where you program with white space, like basically just space and tabs, which is just a fun programming language. Or I even did my own programming language where I wrote the program that translates the text from the programmer to actual binary, these kind of things. So
going back to the
was,
one that is
yeah,
space and taps, like, is it literally like Morse code, like ish? Like,
yeah.
That's really interesting. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, because no one seriously uses it, right? It's really just, well, you have tried it, it's fun. It's just a blank screen basically, no matter how much code you have written. It's crazy to debug. Yeah.
That sounds sounds like it'd be very easy to become an expert though if it's just white space.
Well, absolutely. There are programming languages where you, for example, develop in quotes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example. That's how you code. Basically, movie quotes that he said, like, what was it?
We were just talking about the
Sorry.
Die Hard quote. We were talking about Die Hard earlier. We can't say the quote on air, but yeah.
Can you explain how that works though? Because I understand what you're saying. Okay, so it's a language that uses Arnold Schwarzenegger quotes that's the input, and the output. What does the output look like in that instance?
Well, that's
Anything?
the output is what the developer has written, right? That's what's going to happen, but it's basically being translated to zeros and ones, something that the computer actually understands.
It's like a coding shortcut. The quote is the coding shortcut, so to speak, right?
Exactly. Like when you have a semicolon in one language, it's maybe an exclamation mark for the Arnold Schwarzenegger programming language, for example. These kind of things.
Wow. Well, I'm feeling like I want to jump into this because there's a lot of folks that listen to this show that want to understand emerging technology, but more importantly, they want to understand like why they should care about it or what it could mean to their workflow or what they're doing and that sort of thing. And given the fact that you're teaching things like smart contracts to kids and that sort of thing, let's talk about a smart contract. Let's talk about like, how would you explain that to someone that's sitting down, that's heard the word before, but doesn't know the power of what it could do in order to inspire their curiosity? How about that one?
Great question. In order to answer this in a way that people are actually able to grasp it, I think I need to explain what blockchain is first. And in general, to keep it really, really, really superficial and simple, blockchain is basically nothing else than you have a lot of different computers all over the world in best case, like some are in China, some are in the US, some in Europe, and so on. And these computers basically have a huge Excel sheet. Basically, they just have, what's the English word? A protocol where every one of these computers and everyone else as well that is actually using this can see, for example, when I send Mark, for example, 1 Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency or whatever you can imagine, or $1 or something like that. That's public. And that protocol basically is being observed by all these computers, meaning no one can manipulate it. It's like basically I actually own the cryptocurrency. I actually own that asset. But in contrast to, for example, if you have a regular bank account, it's basically when you open your mobile app with your bank account balance, it just says you have $100, for example, on your account. Sorry. And the bank could, in theory, just remove that to zero or say, well, you can't use it. They can stop you from withdrawing it into cash and these kind of things, which happen a lot. And blockchain tried to solve that issue by you actively owning these assets, because these different computers all over the world actively contribute to that security, that you as an end user actively own your assets. That was a lot, but a smart contract as an extension is nothing else than software code, rules, restrictions, or whatever you want to call it, on that infrastructure, which means whatever you say that should happen will happen. No one can manipulate it, no one can control it. That's it. Basically, a smart contract is really, from an, let's say, ideological perspective, it's nothing else than law that's written by code. It's not a contract in the legal sense because it's very specific, while real contracts are really vague oftentimes. And that's the difference in that regard. But basically, you really have a rule set, and everyone that engages with that smart contract has to follow it. I hope that was somewhat understandable.
Yeah, you sparked some noise in the chat too. A couple of folks chiming in about recalling back in the 90s when people were saying, yeah, you can buy stuff through e-commerce, and people's minds were blown away. Like, how does that thing happen, right? So it's like, it's interesting if whenever a new tech comes around, I think that we tend to be dismissive or just confused by. You always have to look back. It's all cycles, right? So you look back and say, all right, what was the last new tech that people were initially confused by and they're now using every day, right?
Absolutely. It just takes time often, also most of the time, right? When there's something new, there is a lot of, let's call, I hope I'm not getting into trouble by saying this, a lot of BS business cases out there. And with time, companies actively try to solve things, make something easier, and it's not tech first anymore, right? When we look back in 2021 or during the 2000s, tech was the dominant factor why investors got into startups. And now it's AI. And that's usually the wrong approach, because it should be what makes a user's or a person's life easier. And if it uses blockchain, if it uses AI or the internet or whatever, awesome. If not, even better, because it's maybe something known, right? But Use case first. I think that's the consequence.
What do you think's the simplest use case for a smart contract that is or would help day to day?
Escrow services. Basically, we want to exchange some cryptocurrency, also some digital value, if it's an artwork on your side or if it's just a cryptocurrency, for example, a Bitcoin on my side. Although Bitcoin is a special case, I'm just using it to make it easier because most people know Bitcoin. I could send that cryptocurrency to that smart contract, and you could send your digital artwork, for example, to that, and then it's being exchanged. The same is possible for other assets as well, or digital assets, meaning you have a digital representation of that real world asset that you own. For example, if it's a car, if it's whatever, that it's also something that works to some extent, to be honest.
On the other side of that, what's the most adventurous, ambitious use of smart contracts today? Or one-off?
Something I'm really, a lot of people are really excited about is zero knowledge. I'm not sure if you have heard of that. It's basically cryptography, where you are able to prove in a mathematical way that you know something without revealing the actual underlying information. For example, if I want to go into a bar and I'm just 18 years old, but I need to be 21 in America, for example, then right now I need to show my full license, right? Need to show my birth date, I need to show my name, my picture, everything. But instead, zero knowledge would allow you to just prove yes or no that you are old enough. Yes, I'm 21, and yes, that's me. That's
it's like
it.
identity proof,
For
and
example. Yeah?
many things where you don't really want to give the knowledge, you just want to prove something without demonstrating perhaps sensitive data or private personal data. Okay.
Wait. So you're
Right.
saying the lamination machine and printing shop that I have back here to make fake IDs is going to be null and void. I'm done. My business is over.
Looks like it. Nah. I think that entity business, you know it yourself, is something only governance can do in the end, especially actual KYC. And if that's going to happen, who knows?
Interesting question, Jeremy, in the
go ahead.
chat there. Sorry, is it only binary proofs from Kevin Liu in the chat?
Not necessarily, because there are also, let's say, versions of it, right? You can also, for example, prove that's not exactly CK. It's a larger set of that family, as a cryptography family, basically. It's validity proving, where you can verify if a program, for example, if software that you have written ran the way it is supposed to run. And if you think further, that could be really interesting, for example, for all sorts of software that involves human lives, for example. When it comes to airplanes, then the pilot or whoever, that actual company is able to prove in a mathematical way that the software ran in a way that it is supposed to run. Otherwise, they are not able to do that. That's also part of that technology stack, for example. So it's not always about yes or no, I'm old enough. It can be also super complex, like let's say it's it's really bleeding edge technology, right? Goes to smart city sensors. That's something I'm really passionate about right now. For example, when you have sensors like, is there a free parking lot for a car in that area, for example? They're basically just sensors that know if a car is actually standing there or not. Then you usually have the challenge as a company when you're installing these sensors to retrieve the data in a way that it's not being manipulated. It's actually supposed to be decoded, also I wouldn't say decrypted, but basically you retrieve it in a way that it's not broken or invalid or changed for whatever reason because of transmission. And with that technology, you can also prove that the sensor was doing what it is supposed to do, right, for example. And that is all baked by blockchain, for example,
So
and smart contracts.
the smart city thing is really interesting, and yeah, I'd be curious to get your take on this. So the value of a smart city is a lot of things interconnected, right? A lot of information being interconnected, whether it's parking, restaurant availability, whatever it is. The ease of use for someone on the other side. The challenge always is not to have 90 disparate systems, one for parking, one for a restaurant, one for this, one for that. Like how, and I don't think that gets solved really easily because it requires people collaborating that are building things individually um, for the benefit of what they're building, right? Because each of these little things are funded by somebody who expects kind of a return on this. How do you balance building something as a technology company, and then also making the ease of interaction and interconnectivity easy for the end user?
I have to be honest, obviously I need to be careful here what I'm going to share because it's a large client of ours. Basically, what I can say is they haven't figured it out themselves yet, right? It's a huge challenge in general to just get the infrastructure going, then to make it in a GDPR compliant, also data privacy compliant way as well. So, for example, if you have some sensorics in your own home that some company energy provider suddenly doesn't know why you need that much energy and sells it to some insurance companies for whatever reason, and they can make some conclusions based on that, these kind of things. That's another challenge. They're really, most of these smart city projects that I know of struggle with. And obviously, as you said, from a user experience, to make it all plug in together, because everyone is right now cooking their own soup, if that's the right expression. They're all
I
doing
like
their own
it.
thing, right? And that's, yeah, it's just, I would even say, although IoT has been a topic for a longer time than blockchain itself, in my opinion, it's even earlier stage than blockchain because it's just a more complex thing. It involves hardware, it involves edge computing, like things that actually happen on these sensors, complex infrastructure, data privacy issues, and these kind of things.
And who pays for what, right? Who pays for what? Who's responsible for what? It
Exactly.
goes. So it gets me thinking about pointing back to like, all right, what's another old technology that had similar challenges like this? So I spent a lot of time in like networking and structure cabling and that sort of thing. So in these industrial sites, you had all, once the equipment started to become IP based, there needed to be like an aggregation of all that information in the plant. So what is this machine doing? What is that machine doing? And then SCADA systems were developed, which are these like large monitoring systems. But it probably took a really long time for you, say, Kevin, you have a product and a piece, and I'm the management layer of the product and the piece. That's a whole different company. For you to feel comfortable with giving me access to your stuff, knowing that I'm going to do my job right. And then Mark has the same request, right? He's building something. So it sounds like it'll get there, but it is not an easy path to making cities simple for people that live in them, right? Like,
Absolutely, especially if you already have a set up city, right? Because that's the main challenge, and that's why
Yeah.
emerging countries have, in that regard, even an advantage, right? If you look at China and so on, they didn't have to, if I'm not wrong here, set up landlines, for example, because they jumped right into wireless, these kind of things,
Yeah.
and that gives you a competitive advantage. Same here.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at a city like London, you can't move under the ground because there's no space to put anything else now. So everything has to be above ground really to advance the city to any reasonable degree, I think. So,
well, let's talk about the no BS platform and what you're doing with that, and what sparked you to be like, man, I've got to put this out there. Like, tell me.
And you can swear.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
yeah,
You
we're
can,
good.
you can, yeah.
I just have to click a
we're all
button
good.
when I post everything. No, it's good.
Well, the newsletter itself is a really new thing, right? We just had one issuance yet. But in general, from a company perspective, as an agency, we just have this slogan itself, like no BS guarantee, right? We tell you right away, for example, when blockchain or some bleeding edge tech doesn't make sense for you. We are not like we want to extract value out of you. That's the main intent, right? Because a lot of Web3 companies just try to sell you NFTs, crypto, whatever. And 80% of the time they didn't even understand it themselves, what they're selling, right? And that was the main, I would say, I wouldn't say USB, but communication that we wanted to put out there. And that's why it's called no BS.
So yeah, and this is big, right? So like, large companies have these directives, and the directives come down and say, hey guys, you need to do some blockchain stuff. We need to get on this blockchain thing, and that trickles down. And then someone goes out and says, hey, I need to build some blockchain stuff. And you would come in and be like, well, why? Right? I always like asking the why question, right? Because that helps qualify a lot of things. And it seems simple, but it's really not.
Why not?
Right. Yeah. Why not? Okay, cool. Right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Let's can we've spoken a lot about the tech, and it's fascinating, and me and Jeremy personally want to explore the actual technical side of it more in the future. But now I want to change tact a little bit and speak about my daughter, who is the reason that I came into emerging tech. And I don't know about you, Jeremy, or you, Kevin, but I was one of those parents when my kids were born that I was like, right, they're not having a phone until they're 16. They're not, when they can buy their own router, they can go on the internet. It's no computers until they're 15.
How did that work out for you?
Well, my daughter's only 7, my son's 4, but like my mindset has changed. But Kevin, let's imagine that is still my mindset. Okay, my daughter's 7. I don't want her to experience technology, to experience laptops, mobile phones, coding, computers until she's 60. Talk me out of that. Why is it so important that children, why do you spend energy, time, investment going to schools, writing? I imagine you have to write curriculum for this because it's not really been done before. You have to create a course, so to speak. Like, what drives you, and why is it so important to you that children learn at such a young age? I believe you start at 10, maybe a bit younger, but what is it?
Well, there are different reasons for that, right? First of all, I believe in use tech the right way, because you can't that's just my own personal opinion, right? I can't restrict my daughter from using tech, right? From wanting a smartphone at some point and these kind of things. They see it in school with their friends and these kind of things. And you usually, I think I would just risk her being bullied or something like that if she hasn't, right? Has no things like that. And even worse, maybe in school they need a computer for whatever reason and she doesn't know how to use it. So that's the first thing out of a protective approach, why I think at least my daughter, for example, should have at least some digital background. That's the first aspect. The second one is, why am I doing this? Interestingly, that also just happened a few years ago. And when I thought back why I'm doing this, I recognized that, especially when I talked with my own parents, they told me, and I remembered then as well, that that I wanted to become a teacher in kindergarten, for example. I always knew that I wanted to be that. And I just forgot about it. I became a developer, founded startups, these kind of things, and then it somehow automatically brought me back to this. So it's just something that I personally, to be fully honest here, got a lot of, I just love it, right? It gives me a sense of, I don't want to be like just talking here now, purpose and these kind of BS again,
It's
sorry.
good word. No, that's
But
not BS.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's so
I
super.
don't want to overuse it. Yeah.
No, those things that we really want to do, no matter how much we tuck them away, they'll always come back and make us want to dig into them. So look, we talked about this in the pre-production chat a little bit, that there's a NASA study back in the day in the 60s. They were trying to find kind of the smartest people, or study pockets of the smartest people to get the best candidates for NASA. It was a study in divergent thinking. It was using what they call the paperclip test. You hold up a paperclip. How many uses of this paperclip can you come up with? And that's a measure of kind of this divergent thinking, or essentially like creative thinking, right? So here's the good news and the bad news. When you're 5 years old, you're off the charts. Like divergent thinking, you can come up with 100 uses for a paperclip. I did it with my son. We came up with 60 in the back of a car one day, and he was flying off of them, right? Bad news is 5 years later, that capability decreases by 50%, according to this study. 5 years later, another 50%. And by the time we're adults, if we don't cultivate this curiosity, this divergent thinking, we have 2% capability to come up with uses of a paperclip based on that test. So what are some of the cool interactions you're getting from these kids when you present this technology? I mean, some of the nuggets that you get must like blow your mind. Like, what are they saying, and how are they interacting, and how are they responding?
And how much fun is it? That's, I bet they're amazing.
Well, first of all, I have to say that most of these kids are there voluntarily, right? It's very seldom a workshop they have to attend. So in that sense, it's already, those are kids that are genuinely interested in the topic, or at least know after the first day that they don't want to continue. That's the first part. But to answer your question, I just try to do the same for them as what got me hooked in, and that's, to be honest, that hacking, security, these kind of things, right? And that's what I see resonates with almost all kids, right? Oh, well, I know how secure my password is, how fast you can hack it, these kind of things, or how to shut down a PC remotely, these kind of things. And that usually gets them hooked in. And in the context of blockchain, I mostly refer to control, right? Nobody can take it from them, not even their parents, not even
Yeah.
Austria or some kind of government, nobody, right?
Their brother or sister.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's something where they start listening a little bit closer, and then you go into, well, if you lose that, and security and hacking, and why you can actually use that, where you can apply your own creativity, for example, designing your own NFTs, or basically pictures that you then upload to something like the blockchain. And that's basically something that gets them started. So basically just start with storytelling on the first day, as if it's a 5 days workshop, for example. And at the end of the day or next day, we start looking at smart contracts and what they can do with it. And interestingly, when I do this storytelling, I'm oftentimes surprised myself that they come up with use cases that are actually real world use cases for that without me actually listing them as use case. Parents will hate me for that. But for example, one thing.
I would never hate you for sparking my
Yeah.
kids' creativity, man. Ever. Yeah.
Well, maybe you will change your mind in a second.
Yeah, you haven't heard it.
Well, one real world use case for blockchain is indeed, if you think back, transparency, everything is public. nobody can manipulate it, and so on. It's a lottery. Well, we don't want kids to develop lotteries, aren't we? But it's a real world use case, and without me showing that as use case, I think 2 project teams last year, for example, developed a fully working on-chain lottery as part of their smart contract project or dApp project.
How did
And
one of
that,
those things function? Like what was the project that they did? Tell me, like, how did people interact with it?
well, the lottery that I'm thinking about right now, for example, kids just called a so-called smart contract function. Basically, they just sent some cryptocurrency to that smart contract, and then there was just a randomness factor when you got more back or not. So it was really gambling, basically. And yeah,
Kids are smart. Was this using Solidity, or I read in your in the bio about Scratch, like a coding for kids developed by MIT? Do you use both of those, or?
well, there's an beginner's course that's Scratch. That's what I did all the years from the first time I did these workshops. That's completely organized, managed by Coding for Kids. It's basically the largest NGO, it's a non-profit organization in Austria for teaching software development to kids. And what I did, I think 2 years ago, I approached the founder of that organization. Well, let's offer blockchain workshops, right? And for now, we're still the only company, the only ones offering these blockchain workshops in collaboration with them. And that's how it got started. So basically, Scratch is the beginner's workshop. We always did, basically also this year. And blockchain is the advanced workshop we usually do. It's a separate workshop.
Okay, makes sense.
Because blockchain, for someone who never saw a single line of code or has any idea about anything, is, they're kids in the end.
Would it, that may be a stupid question, but for an adult who has zero experience of this, would that be a better option than, would Scratch be a better option than just trying to learn Solidity, or would you recommend just diving in?
Well, Scratch is specifically being engineered for kids. So it's really, you don't code at all. It's really just building blocks that you drag onto your screen. Like if that happens, this happens. And it's specifically designed to develop games, for example. So that's also very appealing for kids, obviously. And as an adult, we teach that a lot as well. For example, this month we are lecturing at a university about blockchain, and there obviously you can start right away with that topic because they understand more complex matters as well, right? You just should start obviously with things that are not too abstract, that give them a rough idea why this is being used, why it looks that way, what the challenges are, what the risks are, these kind of things. But in general, we just need to distinguish between different age groups. That's it.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. You look thoughtful, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm just, it's really cool that, we talked about, like, one of your catalysts for this kind of stuff is the sparking of creativity, not just for you, but for the kids, right? And storytelling, we've talked about, Mark, you and I, for a long time, is the original technology, right? Beyond that, language and letters and all of that kind of stuff. But, starting from there, I think, is super important. And you hinted on this, Kevin, earlier when you talked about, technology for technology's sake, right? There are a lot of companies and initiatives, and even in early Web3 and blockchain, and even in early AI, there's a lot of money just getting chucked at things that just says, hey, we're doing this, but with AI, or we're doing this on chain. Here's 20 million bucks, go build your thing. And then it's like, wait, what is this all for? But starting at the root, starting with the application of it, I think is super important. And, I commend you for what you're doing. It's a very thoughtful approach that a lot of people don't consider.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the end, it's, everything falls into place how it should be, right? Companies that don't really build something of value won't prevail in the long term. It's always been that way. So I think it's just how things are.
Awesome. I'm aware of time, and I think we're gonna have to wrap up in a minute. But can I just change a little bit and ask Kevin one more question about something that's related to language and it's related to what you do, and it's maybe the holy grail of what you're doing, interoperability. And from looking in, the language or languages seem to be a hurdle, a block to that interoperability. Like, how do you think about interoperability personally, and how does what's happening in reality conflict or agree with how you think about interoperability?
Most NFT enthusiasts will hate me for that as well. That's not.
There's none of them left anymore. It's okay.
That's what Rolling Stone says anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really a use case for blockchain, right? It may make things in some instance maybe easier to use an NFT for a ticket, for example, because it's a standard that you can use as a company, that also other companies may understand, right? There's nothing that you need to agree on. That's the advantage here. And that's what people usually refer to as interoperability. And you see my pronunciation is struggling for some words. So sorry for that. But that's in general not a real use case, because you can all these things solve that problem in a centralized way as well, with cheaper developers, faster, with less risk. And that's usually a marketing play still most of the time. The only advantage is maybe through all these tools that we have now, where you can just click and get an NFT, that it may be indeed just faster, cheaper, and easier than developing a centralized solution. So in that regard, yes, it can make sense, but most of the time, it by itself, it's not a use case.
Well, yeah, interoperability is interesting. I'm going to respond to Ninja 1000 on Kick, where this is a culture and emerging tech discussion. We're talking about blockchain and culture and teaching kids that kind of stuff. So thanks for jumping in. Yeah, interoperability, Kevin, to me is like, it's like, oh, how can we get, so interoperability can mean, are we cross chain, multi-chain, like all of that kind of stuff. But then it points back to like, well, hey, what about just a database? This is a nod to, blockchain Gandalf, right? Where he's like, you don't need blockchain for that. A database is better to use, right? And then we get to talk about the whole quote unquote metaverse interoperability, where it's like, if Mark's building his world, you're building your world, and I'm building mine, it costs $5 million to each of us. Our investors are like, when are you going to start generating money? It's hard to be like, hey, I'm going to share my users with Mark and Kevin. That's okay, right, investor guys? So there's interoperability it's a grand vision to have this like grand central station where all tech comes into. It's like the smart cities, having one interface for all these things to come into, but we're a little way off, I think.
Absolutely. In the end, it's a political issue, right? Companies need to agree to some kind of standard, and every standard has advantages and disadvantages. And yeah, just by nature, blockchain has certain standards that the centralized world not necessarily has. And that's the reason why some people refer to it as use case. But yeah, absolutely with you.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great discussion. I can't wait to dig in more into the content that you're doing with coding for kids and blockchain and storytelling driven technology instruction. I think it's awesome. Mark, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, just let everyone know that I'll be doing a full write-up on thinkingonpaper.xyz after this with some show notes and links. Apologies if some people are watching this on replay. We had a problem with LinkedIn and the timing issue. So the irony of an emerging tech podcast having problems with tech is not lost on us. So apologies for that, but we'll do our best to make sure you get the full show afterwards.
100%. Yeah. Also a quick shout out to our friends at Ripple again, WRIPPLE. If you got a fourth quarter budget opening up, some stuff left over, you got some tasks, some new initiatives, you can lean on those guys for quick and effective marketing help. Those guys are great. Send them a note at clientteam@ripple.com with a W. It's been great. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Yes. One more, Mark. Go ahead.
I got one question. Sorry, completely forgot. So you can't see it, but in front of me, there is a wall, and that's where I practice my handstands. So at some point, Kevin, in the next few days, can we just have a LinkedIn chat about what I'm doing wrong and what I'm doing right with my handstands and how I get better? Thank you.
Let's just do a handstand push-up off. I'll go on the wall back here. You go on.
I'm not joking. I'm not joking.
I'm good for probably 15, I think, maybe.
That's good. That's very good. Sure. Yeah.
That's a follow-up show, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining out there in our disruptors and curious minds. You can always find us at www.thinkingonpaper.xyz. We're up on YouTube, and this will be on Spotify as well. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
See you.